Senator Heitkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to add another adjective to the three stellar adjectives that Senator Scott added, and that is integrity. You have approached this process with a level of integrity that is sorely needed in this body, and I want to thank you personally because when you have personal integrity, you can build trust, and it's our trust relationship that got us here. And so thank you, Chairman Crapo, for everything that you've done in a very trying time.
Thank you.
For you personally. Those of us who have worked with you hand in hand know how hard this has been and how hard you have worked. And I have to say, we would be remiss if we didn't apologize to all of our staff for the back and forth that's happened. As a lot of you know, our staff is not only typically banking staff, but also tax staff. So they have been taxed to the max kind of going forward. And I want to thank the staff who were instrumental in pulling this together. I also want to thank Ranking Member Brown. Although he's not going to support this bill, and although he has represented this bill in a way that I don't always agree with, I think that he did approach this with a good faith effort to make improvements, and I want to thank him for that effort. It just was impossible for him to get it across the finish line. I'm extremely proud to have worked with Senator Tester, Donnelly, and Warner, and all of our Democratic and Republican co-sponsors on this economic growth package. I think it's a great example of what can happen when both Democrats and Republicans come to the table with an open mind and a willingness to find solutions to problems and not message political messages. It also shows that bipartisanship can exist. Since I came to the Senate, one of my top priorities, in fact, my top priority on this committee was to provide meaningful regulatory relief for small banks and credit unions in my state of North Dakota. I think today's markup is a huge step in achieving that goal. I'm very proud that this bill makes targeted reforms in a thoughtful way that avoids altering the foundations of Dodd-Frank. And it does all this while adding to core consumer protections that we can all support, such as unlimited credit freezes and more robust fraud alerts. More importantly, this bill is a win for the folks in North Dakota, and as my friend Senator Tester has outlined, for rural America. And think about this, in rural America, you can buy a $90,000 pickup with a piece of paper, but not a $40,000 house at your local bank, because the bank is afraid that they haven't met qualifying mortgage requirements, even though they intend to keep the mortgage on their books. It's just, it defies common sense. This is a bill that I think is a victory for common sense regulation. I think we have had a situation that is where we tried to fix too big to fail and we created too small to succeed. If you talk to a small lender in rural America, you'll find out that they're diverting far too many of their resources and their time towards compliance and very little towards outreach and community development. Although this bill reflects many of my priorities, of course there's not everything that I would want if I were writing this bill and could force you all to vote for it. That's just not the reality of compromise. And compromise is the art of agreeing to let good not be the enemy of perfect. And we absolutely have to move this bill forward if we are going to, I think, sustain a robust community bank development and opportunity in rural America. Finally, I hate to go all lawyer on people, but I think that first I want to respond to the claim that this is similar to what happened with the tax bill. I want to point out that there's been over 20 hearings on this bill and concepts in this package. Nothing in this bill has been airdropped. This bill's been around for a length of time that is adequate for people to take a look at it. And this has truly been a bipartisan process. There's no doubt about it, the back and forth. Today's bill comes to this committee with 12 Democratic co-sponsors. I also want to provide a document for the record. I think it's difficult when a bill is misrepresented and that becomes the legislative history of a bill, because there's always somebody who's going to use a comment of a member here to say, see, this is what this bill actually does. And so in response to some of the comments that we've heard about this bill, we've prepared a document called Fact versus Fiction. It outlines various responses to the claims that have been made. I think it's important to put this on the record as a sponsor, as one of the key sponsors of this bill, because I want this bill interpreted correctly. I don't want the effects of this bill to be overstated. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask that this document be submitted to the record.
Without objection.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank all of my colleagues. We're going to have a long day, I think, here, but I think it's going to be a productive day. And what people in this country are going to witness from this committee room is that this body can function, that we can't exactly sit down and make a deal and move a piece of legislation forward. That is something that this country desperately needs to see. And so my great congratulations to your leadership, Mr. Chairman, and to the leadership of the ranking member who worked hard to get this over the finish line. Thank you for making it possible for America to see the Senate actually function.
Senator Heitkamp, did you wish to speak at all at this point?
I did, Mr. Chairman. I just want to support your inclusion of the provisions for military members. I think this amendment keeps our men and women who are serving in our country more easily to help them keep track of their credit and to help better manage their finances. I think it's a great addition. I want to congratulate you for your hard work on this, and I look forward to working with you to make sure that this gets included along the way. I also think that we can provide a list of the amendments to the original manager's amendment so people can see that the bulk of those amendments were, in fact, consumer protection increases that were provided. So there's no hidden nefarious piece here.
Senator Heitkamp.
Not to belabor the point, we've worked on this a long time. There was a lot of discussion at which threshold. We chose 500 loans. Only the smallest of institutions will be covered by this. I would urge a no vote.
Senator Heitkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a particularly pervasive problem in rural states like South Dakota and North Dakota. We've met with our community bankers. It's virtually impossible. I found it amazing when I purchased a home in Washington, D.C., I had an appraisal within a week. If you do that in Manador, North Dakota, your appraisal may never happen. And good luck finding comparable sales. This problem is not overstated. This is a real problem in relationship mortgage lending in rural communities. We are not abandoning the requirement of the appraisal. But if it is impossible to get an appraiser to come within a reasonable period of time, the bank can make a qualified assessment of what that value is. Now, to understand, in places that we're talking about here, typically the value isn't over $50,000. I mean, if you saw some of these homes, you would think, why are you paying $1,000 to get an appraisal on a piece of property that's maybe worth $45,000? This is where I live. And I will tell you, this is a key component to bringing community banks back into mortgage lending. And I feel strongly about this amendment and urge a no vote.
Senator Heitkamp, number 81.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no intention of moving this amendment. I'll withdraw it, but I think it's a critically important discussion that we need to have, and that is, in my opinion, the biggest unresolved pieces of our financial regulatory structure is the lack of any real criminal defense or deterrence mechanism for executives who tank the economy and otherwise oversee massive corporate fraud. We've been talking about preventative measures to prevent it from ever happening again. As a former prosecutor, I honestly believe the greatest deterrence comes in the enforcement of white-collar crime and making sure that we have the ability to prosecute bad actors. And one of the challenges we've had in holding executives accountable after the financial crisis was that far too often prosecutors couldn't prove actual knowledge of fraud or a criminal act, and as a result, in 2008, the 2008 crisis did not result with any high-level executives going to jail. It's probably the question that I get asked most often. So my amendment addresses this problem by doing two things. First, it creates a more robust criminal liability standard for financial executives who act recklessly and end up causing significant harm to the economy. And second, it would impose a more robust duty to report on employees or senior managers who have credible evidence of fraud or misconduct. So bad news makes its way up the corporate chain, and no one can say, see no evil, hear no evil. going forward. So I know many members, including Senators Cortez Masto and Senators Kennedy, have shared similar concerns about the lack of criminal prosecutions at various hearings over the past year, and I think this amendment and this concept is ripe for bipartisan agreement. So, Mr. Chairman, this is a worthy issue for committee deliberation, and although I'm withdrawing my amendment, I'd ask that the chair pursue hearings in the future on this issue of criminal culpability.
Well, I thank you for withdrawing the amendment. Senator Heitkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I intend to vote against this amendment, but I also want to make it clear that nothing in this bill would benefit Wells Fargo. But it is critically important that we open up our eyes and look at this problem from the perspective of the American people. The American people are fed up with fat cat executives getting their way with regulation and being, see no evil, hear no evil. They're fed up. They're fed up with no one going to jail, and they're fed up with millions of dollars of executive compensation. So if this isn't the instrument, what is? When do we start speaking to that concern of the American people who every day seem to see someone who is in an income bracket where they can accomplish and do whatever they want to do, and there's no accountability? And they are calling our office, they're asking for changes. I'm going to vote against this amendment, but I have to tell you, if not this, what? When do we start holding people accountable for the actions that they've taken?